I watched my husband walk past me without even glancing my way. His hand rested on the small of another woman's back, that casual, possessive touch I hadn't felt in months. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere wrap that probably cost more than my first car, and her honey blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders like she'd just stepped out of a shampoo commercial. Row 2, seats A and B. First class. I took a slow sip of my champagne from row 6, savoring the bubbles and the irony equally. You see, my husband Derek told me he couldn't take me to Paris for our 12th anniversary because it was a mandatory solo conference. Work commitments. Very important clients. The pharmaceutical industry waits for no one. Funny how his solo trip required 2 first-class tickets, a suite at Lemuris, our honeymoon hotel, mind you, and dinner reservations at Jules Verne, the very restaurant where he had proposed to me 12 years ago. Funnier still that the man sitting beside me, enjoying his pre-flight whiskey neat, was Richard Callahan, Derek's boss, the vice president of sales at Biopharm Solutions, the man who held Derek's precious promotion in his weathered hands. Richard turned to me with a puzzled expression. "Vivian, isn't that your husband up there? With the conference attendee?" I smiled. The kind of smile that makes smart people nervous. "Yes, Richard. Yes, it is." In 7 hours and 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, my husband's entire life would come crashing down. And he had absolutely no idea that his wife and his boss were watching from 4 rows behind, with front row seats to his destruction. Before I tell you exactly how I orchestrated the most satisfying revenge of my life, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every single detail of what happened next. Let me back up and introduce myself properly. I'm Vivian Mercer, 41 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years turning luxury travel into an art form. As the senior marketing director at Elite Voyages, I craft dream vacations for people who have everything, except, apparently, loyalty. My office overlooks the Hudson River from the 34th floor of a glass tower in Manhattan. I negotiate with 5-star hotel general managers. I have the personal cell phone numbers of airline executives, and I can get anyone on any flight, to any destination, at a moment's notice. It's a skill that comes in handy when your husband decides to take his college ex-girlfriend on a romantic getaway using your honeymoon itinerary. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband, well, soon-to-be ex-husband, is Derek Mercer. He's 44, a regional sales manager at Biopharm Solutions, and until approximately 3 weeks ago, I thought he was the love of my life. We live in Greenwich, Connecticut, one of those picture-perfect towns where the lawns are professionally maintained, the Range Rovers are always washed, and absolutely everyone is hiding something behind their Pottery Barn curtains. Our house is a 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Lane. White picket fence. Blue hydrangeas. A golden retriever named Winston who greets Derek at the door every evening like he's returning from war rather than a pharmaceutical sales meeting in Hartford. From the outside, we were the couple everyone envied. 12 years of marriage. 2 beautiful children, Emma, who just turned 10 and has my stubborn streak, and Lucas, 7, who inherited his father's charm and hopefully nothing else. I drove a Mercedes SUV. Derek drove a BMW sedan. We attended the country club's summer gala every July, donated to the right charities, and hosted a legendary 4th of July barbecue that the entire neighborhood talked about for weeks. Perfect, right? Absolutely perfect. Until it wasn't. Derek and I met at a friend's wedding in Cape Cod, 14 years ago. I was 27, freshly promoted, and convinced I didn't need a man to complete my life. He was 29, impossibly handsome in his navy suit, and had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room. Classic, I know. The stuff of romantic comedies and cautionary tales. He asked me to dance during the reception, and by the time the band played their final song, I knew I was in trouble. The good kind of trouble, or so I thought. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. He flew me to Paris, business class, because neither of us could afford first class back then, and got down on one knee at the Jules Verne restaurant in the Eiffel Tower. The city lights sparkled below us like a promise of everything our future could hold. "Vivian," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me." I said yes before he even finished the question. Our wedding was small but elegant. 80 guests at a vineyard in Napa Valley. My mother cried. His mother complained about the seating arrangements. Standard family dynamics. The first few years were genuinely wonderful. We both worked hard, me climbing the ranks at Elite Voyages, him building his territory at Biofarm Solutions. We bought our first house in Greenwich when I was pregnant with Emma. I remember standing in the empty living room, my hand on my swelling belly, thinking, this is it. This is the life I always wanted. Lucas came 3 years later. For a while, we had the chaos and joy of young parenthood. Sleepless nights, first steps, first words. Derek was a good father, I'll give him that. He coached Lucas's little league team and never missed Emma's dance recitals. But somewhere along the way, and I've spent countless hours trying to pinpoint exactly when, the spark between us dimmed. Not extinguished, just dimmed. Like a pilot light that everyone ignores until the house goes cold. We stopped having date nights. Then we stopped having meaningful conversations. Then we stopped having, well, everything. I told myself it was normal. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, demanding careers. Every couple goes through rough patches. You push through. You recommit. You schedule a marriage counseling session and cancel it 3 times because someone always has a conflict. What I didn't realize was that while I was pushing through, Derek was pulling away. And he'd found someone to pull toward. To understand why I did what I did, and why I have absolutely no regrets, you need to understand something about my mother. Margaret Ellen Hayes was not a woman who backed down from anything. She raised 3 daughters on a teacher's salary after my father left us when I was 7. She worked summers at a farm stand and tutored high schoolers on weekends just to make sure we never felt like we were missing out. She was fierce. Proud. The kind of woman who wore her best dress to parent-teacher conferences because she believed in showing up like you belonged, even when the world tried to make you feel small. But there was one thing my mother regretted until the day she died. She stayed with my father long after she knew about his affairs. 3 of them, minimum. Maybe more. She found lipstick on his collar when I was 5. An unsigned love letter when I was 6. And finally, a motel receipt for a room rented by Mr. and Mrs. Hayes on a date when my mother was home with us, recovering from the flu. She confronted him, and he left. Just like that. Walked out the door with a suitcase and a half-hearted apology and never looked back. But she never forgave herself for waiting. For seeing the signs and hoping they would disappear. For choosing the comfort of denial over the pain of action. When my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 4 years ago, she called me to her bedside during what we both knew would be our last real conversation. She was 72, and the disease had stolen her fierce pride along with 40 pounds and most of her hair. But her eyes were exactly the same. "Vivian," she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "I need you to promise me something. Anything, Mom. Never let a man make you feel small. And never, never, ignore what your gut is telling you." She paused, struggling for breath. "I wasted years being a fool for your father. Years I could have spent being happy. Don't you make the same mistake." She passed away 3 days later, leaving me $127,000, her entire life savings, including the money from selling the house where she'd raised us, and a handwritten letter I still keep in my nightstand drawer. "My darling Vivian," it reads, "you are stronger than you know. When the time comes, and it will come, because life is rarely kind to women who love too freely, choose yourself. Choose your dignity. Choose to walk away with your head held high. That is my legacy to you. That is the only gift that matters." I spent 6 months in therapy after she died. Dr. Harriet Chen, a brilliant woman with a corner office and zero tolerance for self-pity. She helped me process the grief, the anger, the complicated feelings that come with losing a parent who both inspired and frustrated you. Your mother's advice was born from her own pain, Dr. Chan told me during one session. But that doesn't make it wrong. The question is, would you recognize the signs if you saw them? I thought I would. I really did. Turns out, I wasn't looking closely enough. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. I was just too busy, or too comfortable, to see them. It started about 8 months ago, in May. Little things at first. Derek started working late. Not occasionally, the way sales jobs sometimes demand, but consistently. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he'd text me around 5 p.m., stuck in a meeting. Don't wait up. By the time he got home, I'd be asleep, and by the time I woke up, he'd already be dressed and on his way out. Red flag number 1. I told myself it was the promotion push. He'd been angling for the VP of regional sales position for 2 years, and Richard Callahan, his boss, had finally started hinting that Derek was in the running. Then came the cologne. For 11 years, Derek had worn the same scent. Tom Ford Noir. I'd bought him a bottle for our first anniversary, and he'd never switched. It was his thing, like his blue ties and his habit of reading the Wall Street Journal on Sunday mornings. In June, I hugged him goodbye one morning and smelled something different. Lighter. Citrusy. Completely unfamiliar. New cologne. I asked. He barely looked up from his phone. Oh yeah. Picked it up at Nordstrom. Thought I'd try something different. He'd never picked something up at Nordstrom in his life. I buy his clothes. I always have. But I didn't say anything. Red flag number 2. By July, the password on his phone had changed. I noticed because I needed to check his calendar to coordinate our vacation schedules. Or at least, that's the reason I gave myself. In truth, something in me was already suspicious. Something I refused to name. His old password was 062014, our wedding date. Classic Derek. Sentimental but predictable. When I typed it in while he was in the shower, the screen flashed red. Incorrect. He never told me the new one, and I never asked. Red flag number 3. August brought the gym membership he never used. Derek has never been a fitness enthusiast. He'd rather watch golf than exercise, and the only running he does is to catch a flight. But suddenly, there was a $79 monthly charge from Equinox on our joint credit card. Getting back in shape, he said when I mentioned it. For the promotion. You know how it is. Perception matters. He went to the gym every Saturday morning. Came home freshly showered, which should have told me everything I needed to know. Red flag number 4. In September, I noticed he'd reconnected with old college friends on Facebook. I only knew because I saw the notifications pop up on his laptop while he was getting a drink. Friend requests accepted. New messages received. One name appeared more than others. Tessa Langford. I remembered the name vaguely. Derek had mentioned her exactly twice in our 14 years together. Once during our early dating days when we shared ex stories over wine, and once at his college reunion 5 years ago when someone asked about her. Ancient history, he'd said both times. We dated freshmen through senior year. She wanted different things. We broke up after graduation. 22 years ago. Ancient history. Or so I thought. Red flag number 5. The final flag, the one that should have sent me straight to a divorce lawyer, came in October. We were lying in bed one night, both staring at our phones in that disconnected way married couples do. I asked him about our anniversary plans. Our anniversary is in November, Viv. I've got a conference in Paris that week. Remember? I told you months ago. He hadn't told me months ago. He'd told me 3 weeks ago, and only after I specifically asked why his calendar was blocked. Right, I said. The conference. Too bad I can't come. He didn't even look up from his screen. It's a solo thing. Very boring. Lots of meetings. You'd hate it. Our 12th anniversary. Our first trip to Paris in over a decade. And he was telling me I'd hate it. I stared at the ceiling long after he fell asleep, my mother's words echoing in my mind. Never ignore what your gut is telling you. My gut was screaming. But I still needed proof. The discovery happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, exactly 17 days before Derek's solo conference. I came home early from work, a rare occurrence. A meeting had been cancelled, and for once, I decided to spend the afternoon at home instead of finding busy work at the office. Emma and Lucas were still at school. Derek was supposedly at a client dinner in Stamford. The house was empty. Quiet. Winston greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm, tail wagging, completely oblivious to what I was about to find. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled onto the couch with my laptop. I was planning to catch up on emails, maybe browse winter vacation options for the kids' February break. That's when I noticed Derek's personal laptop sitting on the coffee table. He never leaves it out. Never. That laptop goes everywhere with him. To work, to the bedroom, even to the bathroom when he claims he's responding to urgent emails. The fact that it was just sitting there, unguarded, felt almost like an invitation. For a long moment, I stared at it. I thought about my mother's letter. I thought about Dr. Chen asking if I would recognize the signs. I thought about 12 years of building a life with someone and the terrifying possibility that it was all built on lies. Then I opened the laptop. It was unlocked. Another first. Derek usually protects that machine like it contains nuclear codes. His Gmail was open in the browser. Nothing unusual there. Just work emails, a reminder about his dry cleaning. I was about to close it and convince myself I was being paranoid when I noticed something in the upper right corner. A second account. A small circle with an initial, D, indicating another signed-in profile. My heart began to pound. With trembling fingers, I clicked on the icon and switched accounts. The email address was dmercer847@gmail.com. Not his work email. Not his regular personal email. Something I'd never seen before. The inbox loaded. The first message was from a travel confirmation service. Your Air France booking confirmation. I clicked it. 2 first-class tickets from JFK to Paris Charles de Gaulle. Departing November 15th, the day after our anniversary. Returning November 22nd. Passenger 1. Derek Mercer. Passenger 2. Tessa Langford. I read those names 3 times, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Tessa Langford. The college girlfriend. The ancient history. My hand shook as I scrolled through the rest of the inbox. Hotel confirmation. Le Muris, Paris. The same hotel where Derek and I had spent our honeymoon 12 years ago. A deluxe suite with Tuileries garden views. 7 nights. Restaurant reservation. Jules Verne, Eiffel Tower. November 17th, 8 p.m. Table 4-2. The same restaurant where he had proposed to me. I felt the room spin. The wine glass nearly slipped from my fingers. But I wasn't done. There were messages. Dozens of them. An entire thread between Derek at dmercer847@gmail.com and Tessa Langford design@gmail.com dating back 8 months. 8 months. The exact timeline of his late nights, and gym memberships, and working dinners. I began reading. From Derek, May 14th. Seeing your message made my whole day. I can't believe it's been 22 years. You haven't changed at all. From Tessa, May 15th. Neither have you. Still the same charming Derek who swept me off my feet in Professor Michelson's lit class. May 23rd. It's complicated with Vivian. We've grown apart. Separate bedrooms most nights. But the kids make it hard to leave. Separate bedrooms? We've never slept in separate bedrooms. Not once in 12 years. June 8th. I can't stop thinking about seeing you in Boston last week. That kiss. I haven't felt alive like that in years. They'd met. They'd kissed. In June. while I was at home, coordinating summer camp schedules for our children. July 19th. Tessa, you make me remember who I used to be. Before the house and the mortgage and the country club obligations. You make me feel free. Free. From his family. From me. August 4th. The separation is already in motion. My wife doesn't know yet, but it's coming. Soon, it'll just be you and me. I promise. The separation is already in motion. I had to put the laptop down. I walked to the kitchen, gripped the edge of the counter, and tried to breathe. My mother's face flashed through my mind. Her eyes, fierce and regretful, in that hospital bed. Never let a man make you feel small. I wasn't sad. I wasn't in shock. I was furious. Cold, calculated, ice in my veins furious. Because Derek Mercer wasn't just cheating on me. He wasn't just planning to leave me for his college sweetheart. He was doing it with our honeymoon hotel. Our proposal restaurant. The trip he'd promised me for our anniversary. He was erasing our history and rewriting it with someone else. That's when something inside me shifted. The grief I should have felt was replaced by something sharper, harder, more useful. I picked up the laptop again. I opened a new browser window. And I started making a different kind of plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the most thorough investigator you've ever seen. Let me be clear, I didn't cry. I didn't confront Derek. I didn't make a single decision driven by emotion. Instead, I channeled every ounce of my pain into building an airtight case. The first thing I did was document everything. I took screenshots of every email in that secret account. 147 messages in total. The flight confirmations, the hotel bookings, the dinner reservations. Every, I miss you, and can't wait to hold you, and soon we'll be free from all this. I saved them to a secure cloud folder that Derek didn't know existed. Then I cleared my browser history, closed the laptop, and placed it exactly where I'd found it. When Derek came home that night at 11:47 p.m., smelling faintly of the gym he didn't belong to, I smiled and asked about his client dinner. Productive, he said. Really productive. I bet it was. The next morning, I called in a favor from my assistant at Elite Voyages. Priya Sharma, brilliant, discreet, and utterly loyal. I'd hired her fresh out of Cornell 6 years ago, and she'd become indispensable. Priya, I need you to pull some travel records for me. Air France, JFK to CDG, November 15th. Passenger name Derek Mercer. Of course, she said without missing a beat. Business or personal? Personal. Very personal. Keep this between us. Within an hour, I had the full booking details. Derek had used his company credit card, Biopharm Solutions Corporate Amex, to pay for both first-class tickets. Total cost, $18,450. Company credit card. For a romantic getaway with his mistress. That wasn't just infidelity. That was expense fraud. The kind of thing that gets you fired without severance and potentially prosecuted. My next call was to Catherine Wells, a divorce attorney so formidable that half of Greenwich's wealthy husbands changed their behavior just knowing her name. We'd met at a charity gala 3 years ago, and she'd given me her card, just in case. I'd laughed at the time. I wasn't laughing now. Vivian, Catherine said when I called. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. You were expecting my call? Let's just say I've been in this business long enough to recognize the look. You had it at the Anderson benefit last spring. We scheduled a meeting for the following day. Her office was a corner suite in Stamford with floor-to-ceiling windows and an army of associates typing furiously at standing desks. Catherine listened without interrupting as I laid out everything I'd found. The emails. The bookings. The company credit card fraud. The 8 months of lies. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and smiled. Your husband is an idiot, she said matter-of-factly. An arrogant, sloppy idiot. And that makes my job very easy. What do I do? First, We protect your assets. Your inheritance from your mother, is it in a separate account? Yes. Always has been. Good. Keep it that way. Second, we document everything for the divorce petition. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, but infidelity affects alimony calculations. With this evidence, we're looking at a very favorable outcome. I want more than favorable, I said. I want him to lose everything. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Define everything. His promotion. His reputation. His mistress. His dignity. I want him to understand exactly what he threw away. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's going to require careful planning. And probably some allies you don't have yet. I smiled. Actually, I think I know exactly what allies I need. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into Biopharm Solutions' public employee directory. I found Richard Callahan's biography page. Vice President of Sales, 30 years with the company, Stanford MBA, divorced. Divorced. I remembered Derek mentioning once years ago that Richard's marriage had ended badly. His wife cheated on him, Derek had said. Left him for some golf instructor at their club. Richard never really got over it. Richard Callahan despised infidelity. He'd met me at company Christmas parties 3 times over the years, shaking my hand, complimenting my dress, calling me the better half of the Mercer equation. And he was scheduled to attend the same Paris pharmaceutical conference that Derek was using as a cover story. The pieces were falling into place. My next hire was Gary Morrison, a private investigator recommended by Catherine. Gary was a former FBI agent with 30 years of experience and a reputation for discretion. I need surveillance in Paris, I told him. Nothing illegal. Just photos. Documentation. Proof that my husband and his girlfriend are together at specific times and locations. Consider it done, Gary said. I have contacts at Lemuris. Front desk, housekeeping, the works. Your husband won't sneeze without me knowing about it. With Catherine handling the legal strategy and Gary handling the evidence, I turned my attention to the final piece of the puzzle. Getting myself and Richard Callahan on the same flight as Derek and Tessa. This is where being a travel industry executive became extraordinarily useful. I called my contact at Air France, Marcel, a senior executive I'd worked with on several luxury partnerships. Marcel, I need 2 first-class seats on AF007, JFK to Paris, November 15th. That flight is nearly full, Vivian. Only 4 seats remaining in first class. I only need 2. And I need specific seat assignments. Row 6, if available. Row 6 is available. May I ask why the specificity? Strategic positioning, I said. I'll explain over drinks in Paris. Tickets secured. Now I just needed to get Richard on the plane. This part required finesse. I couldn't exactly call him and say, "Hey, want to catch your employee cheating with your own eyes?" But I did have access to travel arrangements, and I knew from Derek's calendar that Richard was attending the same conference. I made some calls. As it turned out, Richard's original flight was scheduled for November 16th, the day after Derek's. But a scheduling conflict with the conference agenda meant that several attendees were being moved to earlier flights. A few strategic emails from an untraceable account to Biopharm's corporate travel coordinator, pretending to be a conference organizer, and suddenly Richard Callahan was rebooked onto AF007, departing November 15th. Seat 6B. Right next to me. Derek and Tessa were in row 2. Richard and I would be in row 6. Close enough to see everything. Far enough to not be noticed. The chess pieces were in position. All I had to do was wait for the game to begin. The week before the Paris trip was the longest week of my life. Every morning, I woke up next to Derek and pretended everything was normal. I made him coffee the way he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodbye at the door like a dutiful wife who suspected nothing. Every night, I reviewed my plan in meticulous detail, looking for gaps. Catherine and I met 3 more times. We prepared the divorce papers, ready to be served the moment I had photographic proof of the affair. Connecticut law requires grounds for divorce, and adultery is about as solid a ground as you can get. The company credit card fraud is your trump card, Catherine said. Once his employer finds out, his career is finished. No severance, no reference, no unemployment. Not to mention potential legal liability. That's the idea. We also prepared asset protection measures. I moved my inheritance into an irrevocable trust I'd set up years ago for the children's education. I documented every joint asset, every shared investment, every bank account balance. In Connecticut, the court divides marital property equitably, Catherine explained. That doesn't mean 50-50. It means fairly. And when one spouse has been siphoning money to fund an affair, that tends to tip the scales significantly in the other spouse's favor. I also met with Gary, my private investigator, 1 more time before Paris. I'll be at Lemurus from the 15th through the 22nd, he said. Different room, different floor. They won't know I'm there. I've got a camera with a telephoto lens and a guy at the front desk who owes me a favor. What do you need from me? Just the itinerary. Dinner reservations, planned excursions, anything you know about their schedule. I handed him a printed document, every detail from Derek's secret email account, cross-referenced with Lemurus room service menus and the Jules Verne seating chart. Gary whistled. This is thorough. I'm thorough, I said. It's how I got promoted. The flight to Paris was scheduled to depart at 6:45 p.m. on Friday, November 15th. I told Derek I was taking the kids to my sister's house in New Jersey for the week, a completely plausible story, since my sister Carolyn often helped with childcare when both Derek and I had work conflicts. In reality, the kids went to Carolyn's house. And I went to JFK Airport. I arrived 3 hours early, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and cream silk blouse, the kind of outfit that commands respect without drawing attention. I had my carry-on packed with everything I needed: laptop, camera, diplomatic smile, and the absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. The Air France first-class lounge was exactly what you'd expect. Leather seating, crystal chandeliers, a champagne bar with impeccable service. I chose a seat near the window with a clear view of the main entrance, ordered a glass of Veuve Clicquot, and waited. Derek and Tessa arrived at 5:17 p.m. I watched them walk in like I was watching a movie, detached, analytical, noting every detail for later. Tessa Langford was attractive in a predictable, Upper East Side way. She was 40, though she'd clearly invested considerable money in looking 35. Her honey blonde hair was blown out to perfection, and she wore a cream cashmere wrap that practically screamed, "I'm going to Paris with your husband." Derek had his hand on the small of her back. That casual, possessive gesture. I remembered when he used to touch me that way. Now the memory just made me angry. They settled into a love seat near the bar, heads inclined toward each other, completely oblivious to everyone around them. Every so often, Tessa would laugh at something Derek said, that performative laugh people do when they're trying to seem charming. I sipped my champagne and smiled. At 5:32 p.m., Richard Callahan walked through the lounge doors. He looked exactly as I remembered from company events. Distinguished, gray-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He spotted me immediately, probably because I was the only person he knew in the room. Vivian. He walked over, hand extended. What a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you'd be on this flight. Business trip, I said smoothly. Elite Voyages is expanding our European partnerships. Paris was unavoidable. Of course. The travel industry never sleeps. He signaled a waiter for his usual whiskey neat. I'm headed to the Pharmacon conference. Your husband is supposedly attending as well, though I never see him at these things. He prefers client dinners to panel discussions. Speaking of Derek, I said casually, Isn't that him over there? By the bar. Richard turned. I watched his face change in slow motion. Confusion first, just a flicker, quickly replaced by recognition. His eyes tracked from Derek's face to Tessa's, then to Derek's hand on Tessa's back, then to the intimacy of their body language. That's not a client dinner, Richard said slowly. No, I agreed. It isn't. He turned back to me, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder, more cold. Vivian, I'm sorry. I had no idea. Neither did I interrupted. Until 3 weeks ago, when I found the flight confirmations and hotel bookings. He used your company credit card, Richard. $18,000 in first-class tickets and a suite at Lemuris. For a romantic getaway with his college girlfriend. Richard's jaw tightened. He told me he was meeting with European distributors. He told me it was a mandatory solo conference. I took another sip of champagne. Funny how his story changes depending on who's listening. For a long moment, Richard just stared across the lounge at Derek and Tessa, who were still completely oblivious to being watched. I could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the betrayal of a trusted employee, the expense fraud, the liability implications for Biopharm Solutions. What do you want to do? He finally asked. What do you want to do? I countered. He works for you, Richard. He used your company's money to fund his affair. Richard's expression hardened into something I recognized. The look of a man who despised being played for a fool. I want to see this through, he said. All of it. I smiled. Then I suggest we board the plane. The boarding announcement came at 6:15 p.m. Richard and I hung back, letting the other first-class passengers board first. I wanted to make sure Derek and Tessa were already seated before we walked down that jetway. They boarded at 6:22. I watched them disappear through the gate, hand in hand, completely oblivious to the twin storms following just a few steps behind. Richard and I boarded at 6:28. The first-class cabin of an Air France 777 is an experience unto itself. Private suites with closing doors, lie-flat beds, personal entertainment systems, champagne service on demand. Each seat is its own little cocoon of luxury. Perfect for a romantic getaway, I suppose, if you're not being watched by your wife and boss. Derek and Tessa were in row 2, seats A and B on the left side of the cabin. Richard and I were in row 6, seats A and B on the right side. As I walked past row 2, I glanced sideways. Derek was helping Tessa stow her carry-on in the overhead bin, his back to the aisle. She was laughing at something, her hand resting on his arm in that possessive way women have when they think they've won. They didn't see me. I kept walking, slid into seat 6A, and buckled my seatbelt with the calm of someone who knows exactly how the next 7 hours will unfold. Richard settled into 6B, nodding at the flight attendant who offered him champagne. We clinked glasses without saying anything, the kind of silent toast that happens between co-conspirators. The flight departed on time at 6:47 p.m. For the first hour, I simply watched. Derek and Tessa had their suite doors open, and I could see them through the gap in the bulkhead. They were sharing a bottle of champagne, laughing, completely wrapped up in each other. At one point, Derek leaned over and kissed her. Not a quick peck, a real kiss, the kind that belonged behind closed doors. I felt Richard tense beside me. How are you so calm? He murmured. Practice, I said. And a really, really good divorce attorney. The dinner service came at 8:30 p.m. Paris time. The flight attendant brought menus, and I chose the lobster thermidor because I was flying to destroy my marriage, and that seemed like an occasion for indulgence. Derek never noticed me during the entire 7-hour flight. Not once. He was too busy playing the devoted boyfriend, too busy pretending Tessa was his future, too busy living in a fantasy where consequences don't exist. We landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport at 8:15 a.m. Paris time. The plan was simple. Let Derek and Tessa get through customs first, follow them to Lemuris, and wait for the perfect moment. Gary, my investigator, was already in position at the hotel. Catherine had the divorce papers ready to be served. Richard had the contact information for Biofarm's HR director saved in his phone. Everything was in place. Derek and Tessa collected their luggage and headed for the taxi stand, still completely oblivious. Richard and I followed at a distance, close enough to keep them in sight, far enough to avoid detection. They arrived at Lemuris at 9:47 a.m. The hotel is spectacular, a palace-style property on Rue de Rivoli with views of the Tuileries garden. Derek and I had stayed there on our honeymoon, in a smaller room with a courtyard view. Now he was checking in with his mistress for a deluxe suite. I felt a brief stab of something, anger, betrayal, grief. But I pushed it aside. There would be time for emotions later. Richard and I checked into our separate rooms, me on the 3rd floor, him on the 5th, and waited. Gary texted me updates throughout the day. 10:15 a.m. Subjects in room. Room service ordered. 1:30 p.m. Subjects departed for lunch. Café de Flore. Photos obtained. 4:45 p.m. Subjects returned. Quiet afternoon. 7:30 p.m. Subjects preparing for dinner. Reservation at Jules Verne confirmed. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. Jules Verne is located on the 2nd floor of the Eiffel Tower, with panoramic views of the Paris skyline. It's also where Derek proposed to me 12 years ago, a detail that made this confrontation particularly satisfying. I arrived at the restaurant at 8:15 p.m., 15 minutes before Derek and Tessa's reservation. Richard was with me. We'd arranged for a table near the entrance, positioned so we'd see them the moment they walked in. They arrived at 8:32 p.m. Tessa was wearing a red dress that was clearly chosen for the occasion. Derek was in a suit I'd bought him for his birthday last year. They were holding hands, smiling at the hostess, looking for all the world like a couple celebrating something special. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, the hostess said. Right this way. Mrs. Mercer. He was using my name. For her. I stood up from my table. Richard stood beside me. Actually, I said, loud enough for several nearby tables to turn, I don't think that reservation is quite accurate. Derek froze mid-step. The color drained from his face in a way I'd never seen before, like watching a sunset in reverse, the warmth replaced by absolute, bone-white shock. Vivian. His voice cracked. What are you? How did you? Hello, husband. I smiled. Pleasant. Calm. Exactly like I'd practiced in the mirror for 2 weeks. Lovely restaurant, isn't it? Very romantic. Though I suppose you already know that, since you proposed to me at that table over there. Tessa's face went pale. Derek. Who is this? I thought you said. I'm his wife, I said, still smiling. Vivian Mercer. Married 12 years. 2 children. Though apparently he told you we were separated and the divorce was final. Interesting, since the divorce papers were drafted yesterday. Derek. Tessa's voice rose. You said, you promised me. Mercer. Richard's voice cut through like a blade. Derek turned, and if he'd been pale before, he was positively grey now. Mr. Callahan. I can explain. Can you? Richard's voice was ice. Can you explain the $18,000 in company credit card charges? The first-class tickets? The hotel suite? For a personal romantic getaway with your mistress? Every person in the restaurant was staring now. Waiters had stopped mid-service. A woman at the next table had her napkin frozen halfway to her lips. Richard, please, Derek started. Consider your promotion cancelled, Richard said. And expect a call from HR on Monday. Expense fraud is a terminable offense, Mercer. With potential legal consequences. Derek looked like a man watching his entire life collapse in real time. Which, of course, he was. Vivian. He turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Viv, please. It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake. I love you. I love our family. Please, we can work this out. Actually, we can't. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, the divorce papers, prepared by Catherine Wells and notarized that morning by my PI. You're being served. Irreconcilable differences. Though I could have cited adultery, and my attorney assures me the evidence is more than sufficient. I placed the envelope on the table between us. Tessa had already backed away, her hand over her mouth. You said the divorce was final, she screamed. You said you were separated. You said. He lied, I said simply. To both of us. Though I suspect he lies to most people. It's kind of his thing. Tessa grabbed her purse and fled. I watched her disappear down the restaurant's curved staircase, her red dress a streak of color against the gray steel of the Eiffel Tower. Derek didn't even look after her. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. How? He breathed. How did you? I'm a travel industry executive, Derek. I can track anyone, anywhere. I have contacts at airlines, hotels, restaurants around the world. You planned your affair using my honeymoon itinerary. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? He had no answer. I'm not your wife anymore, I said. I'm your worst nightmare. And you brought this entirely on yourself. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, Richard Callahan at my side. Behind me, I could hear Derek calling my name. Begging, pleading, the words blending together into a desperate mess of apologies and excuses. I didn't look back. The fallout was swift, comprehensive, and deeply satisfying. Richard Callahan called Biofarm's HR director from the taxi back to the hotel. The conversation was brief. Derek Mercer committed expense fraud using company funds. $18,000. I have documentation. Terminate him effective immediately and begin an internal investigation. By the time Derek stumbled back to Lemuris that night, alone, disheveled, probably drunk, his corporate credit card had been cancelled. His company email had been suspended. His access to Biofarm's systems had been revoked. Monday morning, he received an official termination letter via email, delivered to his personal account since his work email no longer existed. The letter cited fraudulent misuse of company funds, and noted that Biofarm Solutions reserved the right to pursue civil and criminal remedies. He called me 17 times that night. I didn't answer. He texted 23 messages, each one more desperate than the last. Vivian, please pick up. I made a terrible mistake. I love you, I swear I love you. Please don't do this to our family. I'll do anything, please just call me. I blocked his number at message 14. The next morning I flew back to New York. First class, naturally. Leaving Derek stranded in Paris with no job, no wife, and no mistress. Tessa had apparently checked out of the hotel at 11 p.m. the night before, fleeing back to Connecticut on the next available flight. When I got home, the children were overjoyed to see me. Emma hugged me so hard I thought she'd crack my ribs. Lucas showed me the Lego castle he'd built at Aunt Carolyn's house. For a moment, I felt a stab of guilt. They had no idea their family was falling apart. But then I remembered, I wasn't the one who broke this family. Derek was. And my children deserved a mother who respected herself enough to demand better. The divorce proceedings began 3 days later. Catherine Wells filed the petition on Wednesday morning, citing irreconcilable differences with compelling documentation of adultery. Derek didn't contest anything. How could he? There were 147 incriminating emails, hotel receipts, restaurant reservations, phone photos of him and Tessa at Café de Flore, at the Louvre, strolling hand in hand through the Tuileries garden. Gary, my investigator, had been thorough. The property division was heavily weighted in my favor. My inheritance from my mother remained untouched, separate property, exactly as Catherine had planned. The house in Greenwich went to me, since Derek's name was never on the deed. A quirk of timing, we'd bought it just before our wedding, entirely with my down payment. Derek was awarded 30% of our joint investment accounts, about $180,000. but that was offset by the legal fees he owed and the restitution he was required to pay Biofarm for the expense fraud. In the end, my ex-husband walked away from a 12-year marriage with a ruined reputation, a terminated career, and approximately $47,000 in available assets. The divorce was finalized 7 months later, in June. I kept the house. I kept the children, full custody, with Derek granted supervised visitation every other weekend. I kept my career, my self-respect, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd handled an impossible situation with dignity and precision. Derek, meanwhile, had to move back to Hartford to live with his mother. Evelyn Mercer, a woman who had never particularly liked me, was now stuck housing her unemployed, divorced, disgraced son in her guest room. Tessa Langford wanted nothing to do with him. According to mutual acquaintances, she'd been humiliated by the Paris incident and blamed Derek entirely for deceiving her. He told me they were separated, she apparently shouted at anyone who would listen. He lied. Yes, Tessa. That's kind of his thing. 2 years have passed since that night at Jules Verne. I'm writing this from my new office, corner suite, 37th floor, with views of the Hudson and the Statue of Liberty in the distance. Last spring, I was promoted to Vice President of Marketing at Elite Voyages. The same week, I was featured in Travel Plus Leisure's 50 Most Influential Women in Travel list. The article mentioned my strategic vision and unflappable demeanor under pressure. If only they knew. Emma is 12 now, starting 7th grade in September. She's become a voracious reader, Nancy Drew mostly, which feels appropriate given everything. She asks about her father sometimes, and I answer honestly. Dad made some bad choices, but he still loves you. Adults are complicated. Lucas is 9, and he's inherited my competitive streak. He won the 3rd grade spelling bee last spring and immediately asked when the 4th grade competition begins. Both children are thriving. That's what matters most. Winston, our golden retriever, passed away last year. Old age, peacefully in his sleep. We buried him in the backyard under the maple tree, and I cried harder than I expected. A few months later, at Emma's insistence, we adopted a rescue dog from the local shelter, a 3-year-old beagle mix named Penny, who has claimed the sunny spot in the living room as her permanent territory. I've been in therapy consistently since the divorce. Dr. Chen and I meet every other week now, down from weekly in the first year. We talk about boundaries, trust, learning to open up again after betrayal. You did everything right, she told me at our last session. You protected yourself. You protected your children. You handled an impossible situation with grace. It didn't feel like grace, I said. It felt like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing. I've started dating again. Carefully, slowly, with the caution of someone who's been burned. There's a man named Thomas, a widower, 50s, owns a bookshop in the village. We've had dinner 3 times and held hands once. It's nice. Uncomplicated. I'm not in any hurry. The children have met him exactly once, at a neighborhood picnic, and pronounced him, okay, I guess. High praise from a 12-year-old. As for Derek, I ran into him 6 months ago at a Target in Stamford. I was there buying school supplies with Emma and Lucas. We rounded the corner of the stationery aisle, and there he was, my ex-husband, pushing a shopping cart filled with generic brands and frozen dinners. He looked older than 46. His hair had thinned. His face had that worn-down look of a man who's been defeated by life and knows it. Vivian. His voice was quiet. Broken, almost. Kids. Emma grabbed my hand. Lucas hid behind my leg. Derek, I said, keeping my voice neutral. How are you? I'm okay. Got a job at a car dealership in West Hartford. Sales. It's not much, but... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. That's good, I said. Stability is important. He paused, glancing at the kids. Can we talk sometime? Just the 2 of us. I know I have no right to ask, but I've been doing a lot of thinking, and... No. I said it gently, but firmly. Derek, I wish you well. I genuinely do, for the kids' sake, if nothing else. But we have nothing to talk about. The past is the past. I've moved on. His eyes watered slightly. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I understand, he said finally. I hope you're happy, Viv. You deserve to be happy. I know, I said. That's why I left. I took Emma's hand and walked away. Lucas followed, looking back over his shoulder at the father he barely remembered living with. Mom? Emma asked as we reached the checkout line. Why was Dad crying? Because he made choices, sweetheart, and choices have consequences. That's something I hope you remember. She thought about this for a moment. Like when I didn't study for my spelling test and got a C. Exactly like that. Just with bigger stakes. 3 weeks ago, I took the children to Paris for the first time. We stayed at a boutique hotel on the left bank, not Le Muris, obviously, and spent 5 days eating croissants, visiting museums, and climbing the Eiffel Tower. On our last evening, we stood at the tower's observation deck, watching the city lights flicker on below us like a billion tiny promises. Mom? Emma asked, leaning against the railing. Why are you smiling like that? I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, brilliant, increasingly sarcastic daughter, and thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. My mother's letter. Derek's betrayal. The 7-hour flight that changed everything. Because, sweetheart, I said, this is where I learned that I deserved better. And I've never looked back. Lucas tugged at my sleeve. Can we get ice cream now? I laughed. Yes, baby. We can absolutely get ice cream. We walked down the tower stairs together, my children's hands in mine, the Paris skyline glittering behind us. Some stories end in tragedy. Others end in triumph. Mine ended in both, and I wouldn't change a single thing. If you're watching this and you recognize something in my story, if you felt that same cold dread in your stomach, seen those same red flags you're trying to ignore, let me leave you with this. Trust your gut. Document everything. Find yourself a really good lawyer. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small. Thank you for listening. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like mine, and drop a comment telling me. Have you ever had to trust your instincts, even when everyone else told you that you were overreacting? I'll see you in the next one.
My name is Sloan Mercer, and I'm 34 years old. 2 months ago, my boyfriend looked me in the eye across my living room and told me not to embarrass him. He said it the way you'd talk about parking instructions or the dress code, calm, efficient, like he'd practiced it enough times that it stopped sounding cruel in his head and started sounding reasonable. Just please, Brandon said, straightening his cufflinks in the reflection of my TV. Try not to make it weird tonight, okay? These people are way above your level. I remember the way those words hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous at the same time. Above your level. Like we were talking about a video game, not my entire sense of worth. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I fiddled with the clasp on my necklace and watched him check his hair one more time, the way he always did before important nights. Brandon Cole worked in corporate communications for a fast-growing tech company. His job was to smooth things over, spin bad news into exciting pivots, and make nervous executives sound human on stage. He was good at it. He knew how to perform. We'd been together for 18 months. Long enough for our families to know each other's names, for some drawers to get unofficially shared, for people to start asking when we were moving in together. Long enough for me to believe that, whatever our differences, he respected me. He'd grown up with country club summers, prep schools, and a mother who called his boss darling at fundraisers. I'd grown up in a small Midwestern town where my dad patched the roof himself and my mom taught 3rd grade. I didn't resent his background. If anything, I used to find it a little charming and a little foreign. We joked about it, or I thought we did. I worked my way through a state university, then slowly built a career as an environmental sustainability consultant. My clients were companies trying to reduce their carbon footprint, improve ESG compliance, or at least pretend to, without breaking the law. It wasn't flashy. People's eyes glazed over when I said life cycle assessment at parties. But I was good at it, and in my quiet corner of the world, my name meant something. Brandon knew what I did. He just never seemed all that interested in the details. At his work events, I was Sloan. She does environmental stuff. Before he pivoted the conversation back to whoever had the biggest title in the circle, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there because I loved him. The night everything shifted was a Saturday in early September. Brandon had finally been invited to a dinner party at the home of Graham and Elise Whitaker. The Whitakers were a big deal in his world. Graham was a venture capitalist with a focus on innovative tech solutions. Elise sat on the boards of 3 nonprofits and was the kind of woman who could raise $1 million over brunch. They hosted selective gatherings at their estate just outside the city. Invitations were whispered about more than posted. Brandon had been angling for an invite for months, maybe years. When the creamy envelope with their monogram showed up in his mailbox, he'd practically vibrated with excitement. "This is it," he'd said, waving it in front of me. "This is the room I need to be in." He spent the next week obsessing over it. New suit, new tie, haircut. He booked a detailing for his car even though we had valet. He asked me 3 separate times what I was planning to wear. "I'll figure it out," I said each time. Apparently that was the wrong answer. The day of the dinner, I chose a simple black dress that fit well, a blazer that made me feel like myself, and low heels I could stand in for hours. Professional, clean, understated. I'd worn something similar to conferences where executives twice my age took notes while I spoke. When I stepped out of the bedroom, Brandon looked me up and down with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not admiration, not even neutrality. Disappointment edged with something like resignation. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked. I froze for half a second, suddenly aware of every inch of fabric on my body. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Is there a problem with it?" He hesitated, then forced a strained smile. "No, it's fine. It's just, never mind." The never mind felt like a small, sharp thing dropped between us. We left my apartment and got into his car. He insisted on driving because he knew the way. Translation: he didn't trust my parallel parking near rich people. For the first 10 minutes, the music filled the silence. Brandon tapped the steering wheel in time with the beat, eyes flicking between the road and the navigation. Then he turned the volume down. "I need you to do me a favor tonight," he said, still watching the road. "Okay," I replied, already bracing, though I wasn't sure for what. He took a breath, lips pursing like he was about to deliver constructive feedback in a performance review. "Just try not to embarrass me, all right? These people are way above your level. They're not going to care about soil or emissions or whatever it is you do. Just smile, be polite, and let me handle the conversations." There it was, above your level. I stared at him. "Above my level?" I repeated carefully. He winced at my tone, but didn't take it back. "You know what I mean. These are serious people with serious money and connections. I just don't want you to, I don't know, go into too much detail about your work or your background. It doesn't really fit this crowd." "My background," I said. "You mean the part where my parents don't summer in Italy?" He sighed, annoyed I'd made it about class, when that was exactly what he'd done. "Can you not twist my words right now, Sloan? I'm already stressed. This is a big night." I turned my face toward the window and watched the city thin into expensive suburbs. I could see our reflection in the glass, his jaw tight, my shoulders rigid. Here's what Brandon didn't know. 3 weeks earlier, Graham Whitaker had called me. His family office was looking to pivot more seriously into sustainable investing, and someone in his circle had recommended me. We'd had 2 long calls and a video meeting where he'd grilled me on carbon markets and greenwashing risks, then chuckled and said, "You're exactly what we need." At the end of that call, he'd said, "We're hosting a small dinner soon. I'd like you to come. It'll be a good chance to talk in person, and I'd love to introduce you to a few friends who are behind in this area." He'd paused, then added, "Bring someone if you'd like. Partner, friend. It's casual." I'd mentioned, casually, that my boyfriend had been excited about possibly meeting him at some event someday. Graham had laughed. "Well then, it'll be nice to put a face to the name. I'll have Elise add him to the list." I hadn't told Brandon any of this, not because I was trying to teach him a lesson or set up some dramatic reveal. Honestly, I just didn't like talking about projects before contracts were signed, and Brandon had never cared about the details. When I started explaining the Whitaker call, he'd glanced at his phone halfway through, said, "That's cool," and changed the subject. So I stopped sharing. We pulled up to the Whitaker estate at 6:45 p.m. It was excessive. A sweeping drive lined with trees that had probably been shipped in full-grown. Manicured lawns. A house that technically qualified as a home, but looked more like a boutique hotel. Valet took the car. Brandon checked his reflection one more time in the window, smoothed his hair, straightened his tie. He turned to me. Remember what I said, okay? Just follow my lead. I didn't trust myself to answer, so I just stared at him until he looked away. A server opened the front door and led us through a gleaming foyer, past a curved staircase and out onto a wide terrace overlooking the grounds. Strings of lights were woven through the trees. About 30 people milled around with drinks that probably cost more than my shoes. I scanned the crowd automatically, not for status, but for familiarity. I spotted Graham near the bar, talking to a small cluster of people. Even from across the terrace, he had the relaxed posture of a man used to being the center of attention. Brandon straightened beside me, his networking smile sliding into place. He adjusted his grip on my waist like I was an accessory. "Okay," he murmured. "When we go over, let me—" Graham's eyes found mine. His whole face lit up. He excused himself mid-sentence from his group and strode straight toward us. Beside me, I felt Brandon inhale, readying his polite, polished greeting. "Mr. Whitaker," Brandon began, extending his hand. "Thank you so much for—" Graham walked right past his outstretched hand and grabbed mine instead. "Sloan," he said warmly, shaking my hand with both of his. "Finally. We've been waiting to meet you in person." I watched Brandon's hand remain suspended in the air for a beat before he slowly dropped it to his side. "It's good to finally meet you too," I said, managing a calm smile. "Thank you for inviting us." "Are you kidding?" Graham said. "Having you here is the entire point of tonight." He chuckled. "Well, one of the points. Elise has been talking about your proposal non-stop." Only then did his gaze flick to Brandon. "You must be Brandon," he said. "Sloan mentioned you might be joining us. Glad you could make it." Brandon swallowed. His carefully prepared speech had nowhere to go. Thank you for having us," he managed. Graham clapped him once on the shoulder, friendly but distracted, then turned back to me. "Come on," he said. "Let me introduce you to Elise and a few others who are desperate to corner you about carbon offsets before dinner." He said it loud enough that people nearby turned to look at me with sudden interest. I glanced sideways at Brandon. His face had gone a shade paler, his jaw tight. The expression said everything. He had walked into this house believing he was the one being evaluated, the one on trial, and suddenly realized he was just +1. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. Graham led us to a small group where Elise Whitaker, a graceful woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a generous smile, greeted me like an old friend. "So you're the woman trying to drag my husband into the 21st century," she said. "I've been reading your proposal. It's infuriatingly persuasive." We all laughed, and just like that, the evening shifted. People introduced themselves to me first. A woman named Monica Lane, who ran an investment fund, asked if I was taking new clients. A man named Noah, who owned a green energy company, monopolized me for 10 minutes about supply chain audits. Elise peppered me with questions about greenwashing and reputational risk. Every time someone said Sloan across the terrace, Brandon flinched a little. He hovered close, laughing too loudly at my jokes, touching my arm whenever another man spent more than a minute talking to me, agreeing emphatically with points I made that he absolutely did not understand. 2 hours earlier, I'd been beneath this crowd. Now I was the reason they were here. During dinner, an elegant sit-down affair with place cards and more forks than I knew what to do with, I ended up seated between Elise and Noah. Brandon sat 4 spots down, next to a woman who worked in insurance and seemed more interested in her phone than the conversation. I could feel his eyes on me every few minutes, trying to catch snippets of what I was saying. Halfway through dessert, Graham stood and tapped his glass. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice carrying easily. "As some of you know, Elise and I are shifting how we think about our investments, taking sustainability and long-term impact more seriously. We've been fortunate enough to connect with Sloan Mercer," he nodded toward me, "who many of you have had the pleasure of speaking with tonight. She'll be guiding us through this transition, and I suspect some of you may be calling her after this evening." Polite laughter, scattered clapping. A few people turned to study me, like a product just featured in a commercial. I felt my cheeks heat, but I kept my expression composed. Across the table, Brandon looked like he might be sick. Later, when we said our goodbyes, Graham pulled me aside near the door. "Let's get something on the books for next week," he said. "I'd like to finalize terms and loop in a few partners." "Absolutely," I said. "I'll have my assistant send some times." He smiled. And bring Brandon to dinner sometime. Just the four of us. I think Elise would enjoy getting to know him properly. I glanced toward the entryway where Brandon stood, shoulders pulled in, watching us with a mixture of anxiety and confusion. Sure, I said. That sounds nice. The drive home was silent for the first 15 minutes. The quiet between us wasn't comfortable or neutral. It was the brittle kind, all sharp edges and unsaid things. Finally, Brandon spoke, his voice tight. Why didn't you tell me you knew Graham Whitaker? I watched the headlights streak along the dark road ahead of us. You never asked about my work, I said softly. That's not fair, he snapped. You specifically didn't tell me about this. He gestured vaguely. About all of that. I didn't tell you because the project isn't finalized yet, and I don't like talking about things before they're real, I said. And because every time I try to explain what I do, you change the subject. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about what I said earlier, he muttered. In the car, I was nervous. It didn't sound nervous, I replied. It sounded honest. I didn't mean it like that. You told me those people were above my level, I said, keeping my tone even. You told me not to embarrass you. Those aren't words that slip out by accident, Brandon. They come from somewhere. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. I was just stressed, he insisted. You know how important nights like this are for my career. And you assumed my career was less important, less impressive? That I was just some girl who talks about dirt, who you had to manage. That's not what I think. It is, I said quietly. It's what you've always thought. Every time you introduce me as Sloane, she does environmental stuff and move on. Every time you pick out what I should wear so I don't stand out. You've been managing me like I'm a liability. He exhaled sharply, the sound halfway between a scoff and a sob. You're blowing this out of proportion. I turned back to the window, watching our reflections flicker in and out of view as streetlights passed overhead. I didn't say anything else. I just stared at the darkness and listened to the sound of my own heartbeat, realizing that something between us had quietly, permanently shifted. I didn't break up with him that night, but I knew with a bone-deep certainty that whatever we'd had before that car ride was gone. For a while after the Whitakers' dinner, Brandon acted like nothing had happened. If anything, he seemed lighter, almost giddy. The next morning, he made coffee in my kitchen like he always did, humming as if we hadn't had a conversation in the car that split my view of him in half. He handed me a mug, kissed my forehead, and said, You were incredible last night. I stared at him over the rim. Thanks, I said. He took a sip of his own coffee, leaning against the counter. I mean it, Sloane. I don't know. You just fit in. Everyone wanted to talk to you. Graham clearly thinks you're a big deal. Do you? I asked. He blinked. Do I what? Think I'm a big deal. He laughed, a little too quickly. Of course I do. Don't be weird. He slid his phone out of his pocket and began scrolling. The conversation evaporated like steam. That became the pattern for the next week. Brandon saying the right words on the surface, and me feeling the hollowness underneath. What changed, really, wasn't how he treated me when we were alone. It was how the rest of his world suddenly started treating me. By Monday afternoon, my LinkedIn looked like it had been hit by a minor storm. Connection request. Brandon's coworker. Another request. Someone from his extended network I vaguely recognized from a rooftop mixer months ago. A friend of his boss. A woman who once gave me a tight smile and turned her back when I tried to join a conversation. Now they all wanted to connect. I clicked through a few profiles. Communications director, investor relations, strategic partnerships. Different titles, same hungry eyes in their profile photos. Brandon texted me between meetings. You're blowing up, he wrote, followed by 3 rocket emojis. Everyone's talking about how you had Graham's attention the whole night. I stared at the message for a while before responding. I thought they were above my level. He didn't reply to that part. Instead, later, when we were on the phone, he said, You should add them. You never know where it leads. At the end of the week, there was a happy hour with his team at a trendy bar downtown. In the past, I'd gone and spent most of the evening stirring my drink, while people talked around me about campaigns and clients I'd never heard of. This time, I felt eyes tracking me as soon as we walked in. Brandon had his arm around my waist, holding me a little tighter than usual, like I was something fragile or valuable, or both. Sloane's here, I heard someone murmur. A woman in a green blazer, Amelia, I remembered, made a beeline over. The last time I'd seen her, she'd nodded in my direction and then turned back to her conversation about some award ceremony. Sloane, hi, she said now, smiling like we were old friends. Brandon told us about the Whitaker dinner. You're working with them? Brandon's hand tightened around my waist, pride flaring in his expression. Yeah, he said before I could answer. Graham basically built the night around her. He's bringing her in to overhaul their entire sustainability strategy. Amelia's eyes widened. Wow, that's huge. Are you taking on more clients? Her tone was casual, but I could see the calculation there. She held a cocktail in one hand like a prop, body angled toward me, leaving Brandon just slightly outside the circle. I gave her a polite smile. Possibly, I said. Depends on the fit. People who had barely acknowledged me at previous events drifted over as the evening wore on. They asked about ESG metrics and carbon offsets in the same breath they used to reserve for gossip about promotions and brand deals. It should have felt validating. Instead, it made my skin crawl, because the before and after was too stark. Same face, same resume, same work. The only variable that had changed was that someone they respected had publicly stamped me as important. Brandon seemed to love it. "This is what I've been telling you," he said later that night when we were back at his place, as if the last year and a half had been one long sales pitch. "You're underselling yourself. You should use these connections." "Funny," I said, taking off my earrings in his bathroom mirror. "A couple weeks ago you told me not to talk about my work at all." He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "I told you I was stressed," he said. "Can we not keep relitigating that?" I apologized. "Right," I said softly. "You did." He stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. Our eyes met in the mirror. "You were incredible," he repeated. "I'm proud of you." His voice was warm. His grip was possessive. For a second, I tried to let those words soak in, to pretend that this was what I'd wanted all along. His pride, his admiration, his willingness to say out loud that I was impressive. But the memory of his voice in the car kept replaying underneath it, a quieter audio track. "Try not to embarrass me. They're above your level. Don't talk about your background." Pride that arrives only after public validation isn't pride. It's opportunism in nicer clothes. 2 weeks after the Whitaker dinner, Brandon came over to my apartment with takeout and a familiar kind of excitement in his eyes. "I have news," he announced, setting the bags on the counter. "Good news, or I volunteered us for something news?" I asked, easing off my shoes. "Good for you, good for me, good for everyone," he said, ignoring the warning in my tone. "There's a sustainability and innovation conference next month. Huge event. Graham is doing a keynote. Guess who just got us tickets?" I opened the fridge, staring at the shelves, even though I wasn't getting anything. "You got tickets?" "Well, technically my company did," he said. "But I told my boss we should definitely go. It's perfect. You'll be there in case Graham wants to introduce you to more people, and I'll get to be in the room with half the people I've been trying to meet for years." He was so transparent he might as well have been glass. "I wasn't planning on going to that conference," I said. His smile faltered. "What? Why not?" "Because I'm not presenting," I said. "And I already have meetings with Graham and his team booked that week. I don't need to sit in a crowded ballroom to hear him give the polished version of what I already read in his brief." Brandon stared at me like I'd just admitted I didn't believe in Wi-Fi. "Are you serious right now? This is a huge opportunity for both of us." "Is it?" I asked, turning to face him fully. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like an opportunity for you to walk me around like a credential." "That's not fair," he said, bristling. "I'm trying to support you. I want people to see how brilliant you are." "You wanted those same people to not know I existed 2 weeks ago," I reminded him. "You told me I was going to embarrass you, that they were above my level." "Brandon, which version of me are we bringing to this conference? The liability or the golden ticket?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration leaking into his voice. "Why are you being like this? I said I was sorry. I've been asking about your work, trying to understand it more. I've been introducing you differently." "I've noticed," I said. "You went from 'she does environmental stuff' to 'she works with major funds like the Whitakers in record time.'" "Isn't that what you wanted?" he demanded. "For me to appreciate what you do?" "Yes," I said. "I wanted you to appreciate what I do, not who I know. There's a difference." He grabbed one of the takeout containers and ripped it open, even though we hadn't set the table yet. "I can't win with you," he muttered. "I try to be proud of you, and you twist it into some kind of insult." I watched him for a moment, the way his jaw clenched, the way he stabbed his fork into the noodles like they'd personally wronged him. "Brandon," I said quietly, "be honest. If Graham hadn't praised me in front of all those people, if the Whitaker dinner had been just a nice night with good food, would anything about the way you talk about me have changed?" He looked up sharply. "Of course it would have," he said. "You're making this a test. Like I have to give the right answer, or I fail you." "It's not a test," I said. "It's a pattern. You were embarrassed by me when you thought I was harmless background noise. You're proud of me now because I turned out to be useful. That's not true, he said, voice rising. I've always respected you. Respect doesn't sound like try not to embarrass me, I said. It doesn't tell someone to hide their background because it doesn't fit the crowd. It doesn't manage their clothes and their conversation topics so they don't mess up your big night. His chest rose and fell quickly. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the version of me standing in front of him. You're holding a grudge, he said finally. You're punishing me for one bad moment. No, I said. I'm finally listening to it. He shook his head, laughing once in disbelief. Unbelievable. We ate in near silence after that, the clink of forks and the hum of the fridge filling the room, where easy conversation used to live. At one point, he tried again. Look, he said softer. I messed up. I was scared that night. I've worked my whole life to get into rooms like that. I didn't want anything to go wrong. That doesn't mean I don't respect you. I held his gaze. Then why did you only start acting like you respect me after everyone else did? He didn't have an answer for that. He just looked away. Later, after he left, I sat alone at my small kitchen table, staring at the half-empty takeout containers and his lingering fingerprints on my glass. In the span of 3 weeks, I'd gone from wondering whether he secretly thought I was beneath him to knowing exactly how conditional his respect really was. And once you see that line, where someone's admiration starts and ends, it's almost impossible to unsee it. Before the Whitaker dinner, the idea of breaking up with Brandon felt dramatic, unnecessary, like burning down a house just because one window was cracked. After the dinner, the cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were fault lines. And 3 weeks later, the house finally collapsed. But the truth, the breakup didn't start with a fight. It started with silence. A long, slow, suffocating silence that settled into the space between us like fog. It lived in the pauses between texts, in the way our conversations felt like PR statements instead of real thoughts, in how careful we both became, him not wanting to say the wrong thing, me refusing to pretend nothing had changed. One night, we were making dinner at my place. Pasta, something simple, when he said, too casually, Graham mentioned grabbing coffee next month. Maybe we could all go together? I didn't even look up from the cutting board. Why would I bring you to that meeting? He froze, a piece of broccoli half cut under his knife. So I can meet him, he said. Build rapport. He's a huge connection, Sloan. That's exactly the problem. What does that mean? It means you're not trying to understand my work, I said. You're trying to network through me. His jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Is it? Every time you mention Graham now, you're talking about your opportunities. Not mine, not our relationship, just your access. He dropped the knife with a sharp clatter. Do you hear yourself right now? I'm trying to support you. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. You're trying to leverage me. His face flushed. Why are you being so hostile lately? I said I was sorry. I've done everything you asked. I started asking about your work. I brag about you to my team now. I don't want you to brag about me, I said. I wanted you to respect me, before the Whitakers made it fashionable. That hit him. I saw the words land like a blow. He turned away, bracing his hands on the counter. So what? He said quietly. You're never going to forgive me? One mistake and I'm the villain forever? It wasn't one mistake, I said. It was the truth you let slip. And once someone tells you what they really think, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. He spun back toward me. So what, you're ending this? I don't know, I said honestly, but I don't recognize the version of us that exists now. He stared at me for several long seconds, breathing hard, and then the anger drained from his face. He looked scared. Sloan, he said, voice breaking, please don't throw this away. I love you. My throat tightened. I believed he meant it, but I also knew love wasn't the issue anymore. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, habit, and I could see the notification reflected in the glass backsplash behind him. It was from someone he worked with. A message preview. Did you get her to introduce you yet? Brandon went still. Slowly I said, introduce you to who? He locked the phone. Too fast. Nobody. It's not just work stuff. Let me see it. No. That one word, sharp, defensive, was the final confirmation I didn't want, but already suspected. He'd been planning it, coaching his colleagues behind the scenes, positioning me like a stepping stone he just needed permission to walk across. My stomach went cold. Brandon, I said quietly, I can't do this. His face crumpled. Sloan, please don't do this. I was stupid, okay? I shouldn't have said what I said in the car. I swear I've changed. I'm trying. But it was too late for trying. Something had snapped inside me, not from anger, but from clarity. You didn't suddenly respect me, I said. You just realized other people did? And you adjusted. That's not growth. That's opportunism. He stepped toward me, reaching. Sloan, don't go. Don't end this. I backed away. No, this already ended. We're just finally saying it out loud. He stared at me, breathing hard, hands trembling like he wasn't sure what to hold on to. And then very softly he said, "You'll regret this." But the only thing I regretted was not seeing it sooner. That night, I packed the sweater he kept at my place and left it in a neat folded stack by the door. He texted me twice, long paragraphs turning into frantic half-sentences, but I didn't answer. The next morning, I woke up alone. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. A month after the breakup, my life looked completely different. The Whitaker Project didn't just go well, it exploded. Graham introduced me to 3 other funds, 2 CEOs, and 1 nonprofit director who practically begged me to take them on. I hired an assistant, moved into an office that didn't smell like old carpet, and upgraded my laptop for the first time in years. My calendar stopped having blank spaces. My bank account finally looked like it belonged to an expert in her field. But the biggest shift wasn't professional. It was personal. I met Eli Turner at a community sustainability workshop Graham's wife had asked me to visit. Eli was a middle school science teacher. Funny, curious, a little awkward, and the first man in years who didn't look past me while talking. He loved every messy, nerdy corner of my job, asked follow-up questions, lit up when I explained things. Our first date lasted 4 hours. Our second lasted 6. And he introduced me to his friends like this. "This is Sloan. She's amazing." Not, "This is Sloan. She works with important people." Just amazing, as a human, as herself. I didn't realize how starved I'd been for that. 6 weeks after the breakup, I ran into Brandon. It was at a professional mixer downtown. He was with a woman in a red dress who looked exactly like someone who would appear on his company's branding materials. Sleek, confident, polished. He saw me from across the room. His face shifted. Surprise, then embarrassment, then something I didn't have a name for. Something like longing. I gave him a polite nod and turned back to my conversation with Eli, who was animatedly describing the chaos of his 8th grade science fair. That night at 11:46 p.m., Brandon texted me. "It was good to see you. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I really did learn from what happened between us. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance." I stared at the message for a long moment, and then I put my phone down and went to sleep. No reply, no second thoughts. Some lessons don't need discussion. They just need closure. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch with Graham at a restaurant near his office when he asked, almost casually, "How's Brandon doing? Haven't seen him around." "We broke up," I said. Graham nodded once, unsurprised. "Elise didn't think he was right for you," he said. "She said he seemed more interested in who you knew than who you were." I sat with that for a moment. It was strangely comforting to know someone else had seen it too, long before I dared to. We finished lunch, talked next steps, signed contracts, moved forward with a future I never would have had if Brandon hadn't said the quiet part out loud that night in the car. Funny how clarity arrives. Sometimes like a whisper, sometimes like a wrecking ball, and sometimes like a man you love saying, "Try not to embarrass me," right before the world proves him catastrophically wrong. I'm grateful I learned the difference between conditional respect and real respect at 34, not 44 or 54 or too late. And I'm even more grateful that the person who underestimated me the most is just a footnote in a story that turned out bigger, softer, and brighter than anything I expected.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.